Begin. David Cole stared at the flickering screen of his computer, the glow reflecting in his tired eyes. At 35, he carried the weight of years spent chasing shadows and whispers in the dark underbelly of the drug world. His office, a cramped space filled with stacks of files and lukewarm coffee cups, felt more like a second home than his actual apartment. David was a DEA agent, one of the best, but even the best needed help. His help came in the form of Marco, a ghost in the cartel's machine, a man who fed David secrets like breadcrumbs in a dark forest. Marco wasn't just any informant. He was David's lifeline. The information Marco provided wasn't just good, it was perfect. It led to big busts, stopping tons of drugs from hitting the streets and putting dangerous people behind bars. Marco knew things before they happened, details so small and specific that only someone deep inside the cartel could know them. He told David where the drugs would cross, who would be driving, and even what color car they'd be in. Because of Marco, David had built a reputation as a wizard, always one step ahead. But David knew the real wizard was Marco, risking his life every single day. Their connection was a secret shared only by a very few trusted people in the DEA. It had to be. If the cartel ever found out about Marco, his life wouldn't be worth a single penny. David often thought about Marco, a family man, doing what he did for reasons David didn't fully understand, but respected deeply. Maybe it was for money, maybe for a safer future for his kids, or maybe, just maybe, Marco believed in a world free from the cartel's cruel grip. David never asked, and Marco never told. Their relationship was built on trust and the unspoken understanding of the immense danger they both faced. Today, however, the air in David's office felt thicker, heavier. Marco was supposed to make contact hours ago. A simple coded message, a quick burst of numbers that meant all clear or danger. Nothing. David had tried the backup channels, the emergency signals, even the desperate forbidden direct line. Still nothing. His stomach churned with a cold dread. Marco was never late. He was always on time, always precise. This silence was louder than any alarm bell. It screamed trouble. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble. He hadn't slept well in weeks, the pressure of his work always a heavy blanket. Now, the worry for Marco was a sharp knife. He pictured Marco's face, etched with worry lines, but always determined. He remembered their last secret meeting in a noisy market on the Mexican side of the border. Marco had looked more nervous than usual, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. "They're getting suspicious, David," Marco had whispered, his voice low, almost swallowed by the market's chatter. "Too many of their operations are failing. They're looking for a rat." David had tried to reassure him, telling him they were being careful, that no one suspected Marco. But even as he said the words, a chill had run down his spine. The cartel wasn't stupid. They might be violent, but they were also cunning. They would eventually figure out that someone was talking. And if they found the mole, they wouldn't just hurt them. They would make an example out of them. Now, the silence for Marco was a stark reminder of that conversation. David pushed away from his desk, the chair scraping loudly on the linoleum floor. He walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling below. It was late, but the city never truly slept, just like the cartel never truly rested. They were always working, always plotting. And somewhere out there, Marco was either in grave danger or already gone. David pulled out his burner phone, a cheap, untraceable device he used only for Marco. He stared at the blank screen, willing it to light up with a message. Nothing. His mind raced, thinking of all the possible reasons for Marco's silence. Had he been caught? Was he dead? Or had he simply decided to disappear, to run from the danger that had finally become too great? The last thought, while painful, offered a sliver of hope. If Marco had just run, he might still be alive. But David knew Marco. He wouldn't abandon their mission without a word. A cold wave washed over David. Marco's information had not only helped the DEA, it had also put David in a very dangerous spot. He was the one who handled Marco, the only direct link. If the cartel found Marco, they would surely torture him for information. And if Marco broke, even under immense pain, David's name would be the first one he spoke. David was no stranger to danger. But this felt different. This felt personal. The stakes had just gotten much, much higher. He picked up the phone, his finger hovering over the speed dial for his superior, Agent Miller. Miller was a by-the-book kind of guy, solid, but not always understanding of the messy, unpredictable world of informants. David knew he had to tell Miller about Marco's silence, but he dreaded the conversation. Miller would want answers David didn't have, and he would want to pull the plug on the operation, maybe even on David himself. But the fear for Marco was stronger than the fear of Miller's reprimand. David took a deep breath, steeling himself. He had to find Marco, or at least find out what happened to him. Marco had trusted him, and David would not let him down. He owed Marco that much and more. End. Begin. The conversation with Agent Miller had been exactly as David feared. Brief, tense, and unsatisfying. Miller had listened, his face a mask of practiced calm, then dismissed David with a curt, "We'll look into it." But David knew look into it meant paperwork, bureaucracy, and a slow-grinding machine that moved far too slowly for a situation as urgent as Marco's disappearance. David couldn't wait. He had to act. He pulled up the digital map of the border area near El Paso, the place where Marco was supposed to make his drop. It was a desolate stretch of land, dusty and unforgiving, crisscrossed by trails used by smugglers and migrants alike. The meeting point, codenamed Coyote's Den, was a small, abandoned shack barely visible against the scrub brush and jagged rocks. David zoomed in, looking for any detail he might have missed. Marco had been clear. This information was big, bigger than anything he'd shared before. He'd hinted at a new drug route, one that bypassed traditional checkpoints and involved high-level corrupt officials on both sides of the border. He'd even whispered about a powerful new leader rising within the cartel, someone more ruthless and cunning than any they'd faced before. This wasn't just intelligence. It was a potential game-changer, enough to cripple the cartel for years. That's why the danger felt so sharp, so real. Marco wasn't just risking his life. He was putting a target on his back the size of a billboard. David had assembled a small, trusted team for the operation. Agent Elena Rodriguez, a sharp, no-nonsense operative with a knack for surveillance, was already setting up her hidden cameras miles away. Her calm voice in his earpiece was always a comfort, a steady presence in the chaos. Then there was Ben Carter, a burly former Marine who handled the heavy lifting and close protection. Ben didn't ask many questions, but he followed orders with unwavering loyalty, a quality David valued above all else. They were his A-team, the ones he trusted with his life, and now, with Marco's. "All right, team." David's voice crackled over the comms, a mix of tension and forced calm. "We're going quiet. Elena, you got eyes on Coyote's Den?" "Affirmative, David." Elena's voice came back, clear despite the distance. "Just a lot of dust and tumbleweeds out here. Nothing moving yet." "Ben, you're with me. We'll approach on foot from the north. Stay low, stay out of sight. Remember, Marco's signal is our green light. Until then, assume the worst." Ben grunted in agreement. "Got it, boss. Just say the word." David gripped the steering wheel of their unmarked SUV, the desert heat already seeping into the cabin even though the sun was still low in the sky. The landscape outside was eerily beautiful, the colors of dawn painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples. But David barely noticed. His mind was a whirlwind of possibilities, each one darker than the last. Marco's last message, a garbled voice memo that had cut out abruptly, kept replaying in his head. "The eagle flies at midnight. New boss. Very dangerous. They know." The message had ended with a sudden, choked sound like a gasp. David had tried to convince himself it was just a bad connection, but the cold knot in his stomach told him otherwise. They parked the SUV a few miles from the rendezvous point, hidden among some rocky outcrops. David and Ben geared up, checking their weapons and comms one last time. The air was still and dry, carrying the faint scent of creosote and dust. Every rustle of wind, every distant bird cry, sounded amplified, a potential sign of danger. As they moved through the sparse desert, David felt the familiar prickle of paranoia on the back of his neck. He'd been in countless dangerous situations, But this one felt different. The stakes were personal. Marco wasn't just an asset. He was a human being, a man who had put his life on the line for David and for justice. If anything happened to him, David would carry that burden forever. They reached their observation point, a small ridge overlooking the shack. David pulled out his binoculars, scanning the area. The shack stood silent and empty, its windows like vacant eyes. No sign of Marco. No sign of anyone. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the usual buzz of the border. "Still nothing, Elena?" David whispered into his mic. "Negative, David. Area's clear. Too clear, if you ask me." Elena's voice held a note of unease. David agreed. "Too clear." Marco was supposed to be here, waiting, nervous but ready. His absence was a screaming void. He knew Marco's protocol. If he couldn't make it, he would send a coded message. If he was compromised, he would send a different one. The complete lack of communication was the most alarming sign of all. Suddenly, a glint of metal caught David's eye, half hidden in the dirt near the shack's entrance. He lowered his binoculars, a cold dread washing over him. It was a small, silver locket, the kind Marco always wore around his neck. It was open, and inside, a tiny, faded picture of a smiling woman and two young children. Marco's family. David's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't just a dropped item. It was a message. A desperate, silent scream. Marco would never lose this locket. It was his most prized possession. Its presence here meant only one thing. Marco had been here, and something terrible had happened. "Ben," David hissed, his voice tight. "Stay here. Cover me. I'm going in." Before Ben could protest, David was already scrambling down the ridge, his eyes fixed on the locket. The desert floor felt strangely soft under his boots, as if absorbing the growing tension. He reached the shack, his hand instinctively going his weapon. He knelt, picking up the locket. It was slightly scuffed, as if it had been dropped in a struggle. Then he saw it, a faint, almost invisible smear on the dusty ground next to where the locket lay. It was dark, a deep, rusty red. Blood. David felt a sickening lurch in his stomach. Marco wasn't just missing, he was gone. And the cartel knew. They had found their mole. And the terrifying realization hit David with the force of a physical blow. If they had found Marco, they knew about him too. He was next. The hunt had begun. Begin. The scent of dust and fear filled David's nostrils as he stared at the dark stain on the ground. It was undeniable. Marco wasn't just late, he was gone, and not by choice. The locket, clutched in David's trembling hand, felt heavy, a cold promise of what was to come. He stood, his gaze sweeping the desolate landscape, suddenly seeing danger in every shadow, every distant shimmer of heat. The silence that Elena had found too clear now screamed of an ambush, a trap. "Ben, Elena, we're compromised. Get out now." David's voice, usually steady, was raw with urgency. He spun around, weapon raised, scanning the horizon. He knew how this game worked. The cartel wouldn't just take Marco. They'd use him, extract every piece of information, every name. And David's name would be at the top of that list. A sharp crack echoed through the desert, followed by the whistle of a bullet. It ricocheted off a rock near David's head, sending a shower of sparks. He dove behind the flimsy shack, heart pounding against his ribs. "Sniper," he yelled into his comms. "They knew we were coming." "On it, David. I see movement, 3 o'clock, ridge line." Elena's voice was tight with focus. Another shot rang out, closer this time, hitting the wooden frame of the shack with a splintering thud. "Ben, where are you?" David crawled to the corner of the shack, peering out cautiously. "Engage, David. 2 hostiles, coming in fast from the south." Ben's voice was strained, punctuated by the sharp bursts of his automatic rifle. David knew they were outmatched. This wasn't just a couple of low-level thugs. This was a coordinated attack. The cartel wanted him, and they wanted him dead. He had 2 choices: stay and fight a losing battle, or run and live to fight another day. The decision was made in a split second. Marco was gone. His mission now was to survive, to figure out who betrayed them, and to make the cartel pay. Fall back. Both of you. To the primary extraction point. I'll draw their fire. David yelled, knowing it was a gamble. He popped up from cover, firing a quick burst towards the ridge line, then ducked again as bullets chewed into the shack around him. He heard Elena confirm, followed by the sound of her vehicle roaring to life. Ben was still engaging, buying them precious seconds. David broke cover, sprinting across the open ground, zigzagging to make himself a harder target. Dust kicked up around his feet as he ran, the sound of gunfire chasing him. He heard a yell, then Ben's voice. I'm clear. Coming to you, David. Negative, Ben. Get to the extraction. I'm taking the long way around. David shouted back, veering sharply towards a dry creek bed, a natural trench that offered some cover. He heard Ben's frustrated grunt, but knew his loyal agent would follow orders. He scrambled down into the creek bed, the loose rocks shifting under his feet. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. He ran, pushing his lungs to their limit, the image of Marco's locket burning in his mind. He had to escape, not just for himself, but for Marco, to avenge him. He emerged from the creek bed, gasping for breath, near a small, abandoned dirt road. He knew this area. It would lead him away from the main border roads, into the maze of backcountry tracks where he could disappear, at least for a while. As he ran, he pulled out his secondary burner phone, a different one from the one he used for Marco. He needed to make contact with someone outside of Miller's direct line of command, someone he could trust, or at least someone who wouldn't dismiss his claims of betrayal. He punched in a number, his fingers fumbling. It was for an old contact, a grizzled FBI agent named Reynolds, known for his distrust of bureaucracy and his uncanny ability to sniff out corruption. The phone rang once, twice, then a gruff voice answered. Reynolds, it's David Cole. I am compromised. My informant, Marco, he's gone. They knew everything. I think we have a mole, high up. David spoke quickly, concisely, his voice low and urgent. There was a pause on the other end. Cole, you're a long way from your jurisdiction. And mole high up, that's a serious accusation. I'm at Coyote's Den. Marco's locket was there. And blood. They're hunting me. I need help, Reynolds. Unofficial help. Another pause. Then, all right, Cole, give me your last known coordinates. I'll see what I can do. But if you're wrong, you're on your own. David rattled off the coordinates, his eyes scanning the empty road. He knew Reynolds was a long shot, but he was his only shot. He tossed the burner phone into the brush, then continued to run, his mind racing. Who could it be? Who inside the DEA would betray them, betray Marco? It had to be someone with access to Marco's identity, someone who knew about the border handoffs, someone who knew too much. He ran for what felt like hours, his body aching, his throat raw. The sun was climbing higher, beating down on him with relentless heat. He kept to the shadows of the occasional rock formations, his eyes constantly scanning for any sign of pursuit. He knew they wouldn't give up easily. He was a loose end, a witness to Marco's disappearance, and a target. Finally, he saw it in the distance. A dusty, beat-up pickup truck parked off the road, partially hidden by a cluster of mesquite trees. It was the designated backup extraction vehicle, driven by Ben. David broke into a final sprint, adrenaline giving him a last burst of energy. He scrambled into the passenger seat, gasping for air. Ben immediately floored the accelerator, sending a cloud of dust billowing behind them. You okay, boss? Ben asked, his eyes on the rearview mirror. I've been better, David managed, pulling out a bottle of water and chugging it. Elena. She's fine. Got out clean. Heading to the secondary rendezvous point. David nodded, his mind already shifting gears. The immediate threat was averted, but the larger danger remained. He had to find out who had betrayed them. He leaned back in the seat, closing his eyes for a moment. The faces of his colleagues flashed through his mind. Who among them could be a traitor? The thought was sickening, a betrayal from within. He opened his eyes, a grim determination setting in. He wouldn't run forever. He would find the truth. And when he did, he would bring down the entire network, starting with the snake in the DEA. The hunt had indeed begun, but David Cole was no longer the prey. He was the hunter, And he would start by finding out who knew about Marco's locket. Only a handful of people knew it was Marco's prized possession, a tiny detail only privy to the highest levels of their operation. And